Good afternoon, everyone. Lots of energy in this room. Welcome to all who are here at Sacred Heart Convent, and welcome to all who are with us on Zoom. It's good to have a voice this time. Last time I didn't have much of a voice, so it's nice to be able to use it today. Today's first reading from Isaiah is a wonderful way to begin this new church year. O Lord, you are our Father, we are the clay, and you are the potter. We are the work of your hands. Last evening I was lector at St. Agnes, and I misread the second line, and I read, you are the clay, we are the potter. Perhaps sometimes we get this wrong, but thank God for his faithful presence in our life, especially during this Advent season. We witnessed that. I did go back and correct myself. With your handouts today, you received a copy of some Advent bookmarks that look like this. Each year, the Racine Associates and Sisters prepare those for us, and they are short practices that you can choose to help with living Advent. They call us to be intentional with our time as we reach out to comfort and care for others, and also to strive to care for our earth, which Pope Francis continues to call us to do. Our formation session today is entitled Catholic Social Teachings, and our speaker is Sister Marcelline Koch. Sister is one of our sisters, and she directs the Office of Justice for our community. That includes serving as our justice promoter, co-coordinating our anti-racism team, and also working with our socially responsible investing efforts. Sister has in the past served a 6-year term as the North American co-promoter for justice for the Dominican family in North America. It was in that capacity that she was part of a delegation to Iraq in January of 2015. Previous to this ministry, Sister Marcelline was on our congregation leadership team for 8 years. She directed Project Irene, an education and advocacy initiative focused on women and children. Marcelline was an elementary school educator and administrator for over 30 years, serving both in urban and rural areas. She currently volunteers on the leadership committee for the Springfield Coalition on Dismantling Racism, and also with the Springfield Immigrant Advocacy Network. So we're so grateful to have Sister Marcelline as our presenter today. Sister. Be sure I didn't take the paper.
Okay. Thanks, Sister Joan. And it's wonderful to be with you today. I always think of adding to, you talk about the things that you've done, but what I always want to add about myself with this work is that I believe it can only be done in networking and collaborating with others. And so that's what I'm inviting you into today. You have a copy for our prayer. It's a very brief prayer to kind of get us in the mindset, being light bearers of hope in today's world. So as we quiet ourselves, we listen to Matthew's words to us. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world. You don't build a city on a hill and try to hide it, do you? You don't light a lamp and then put it under a bushel basket, do you? No, you set it on a stand where it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, your light must shine before others, so that they may see your good acts and give praise to our Abba God in heaven." And together we say, Jesus, light of the world, may we be your light bearers of hope to all who suffer injustice. Inspire us to be your ears, voice, feet, and hands. And I conclude, Jesus, light of the world, be near to us in these times of injustice and in these moments of terror. Remind us that by remembering the affliction of our sisters and brothers, we mark their pain as our own. Sustain those who weep with your loving presence, and help us to find ways to comfort those who mourn. Bless citizens and leaders of all nations, so that poverty, hunger, slavery, inequality, and racism may once and for all become obsolete. We pray in your name, Jesus, you who are love. Amen. So that helps us to move into our work today. It does work. This is wonderful. Last month you focused on Dominican spirituality and the 4 pillars, if I remember correctly, that prayer, study, community, and mission. Our topic today will lift up ways to live out those 4 pillars. Today is also the first Sunday of Advent. We often hold this time of Advent as a time of waiting. And a few weeks ago, I saw this sign in front of a church. It said, "If you are waiting on the Lord, do what waiters do, serve." So Catholic social teaching helps us in our serving. The social teaching of the church is really a very rich treasure. It's wisdom about building a just society and for us living lives of holiness. And all of this in the middle of the challenges of contemporary society. So we'll start with looking at the roots of Catholic social teaching. I use this image because you can say it's like an ancient tree, and the roots are the scriptures. Its trunk has grown in girth over the years, especially in response to dramatic developments in society. So what I want to do first is to share some context and history for our Catholic social teaching. It just doesn't come out of nowhere. Social justice is one of the fundamental issues of the Bible. God created the world and humankind. Whoops, I should be careful to hit that. And in creating the world, God desires the life and happiness of all of us and all of creation. In the Hebrew scriptures, we learn about our ancestors and their struggle to follow God's invitation. They talked about being a people in covenant, and they wanted to do that. They were inspired to try to build a society that ever more clearly protected human life and dignity. And like us today, they weren't always successful. So in their day, the prophets raised their voices. They raised their voices to defend the poor and to call people back to being just. So let's look at the prophetic tradition, just a few of the prophets. First, we have time and again when they defended the poor. And so here we have Ezekiel's words. He scolded the leaders. "You didn't strengthen the weak, nor heal the sick, nor bind up the injured, but you rule them harshly and brutally." And then we go to Zechariah. He said, he asked them to judge with true justice and show kindness and compassion toward each other. Don't oppress the widow and orphan, the resident alien, or the poor. And in the stories of widows in those days, widows were very vulnerable because once they lost their husbands, they had no one for protection in society. And then we move on to Isaiah. You'll recognize this one because we hear it in our Lenten season. He talks about releasing those bound unjustly, untying the thongs of the yoke, setting free oppressed, breaking off every yoke, sharing bread, and bringing the afflicted and homeless into your house. And then they also talked about the injustices inflicted on laborers. So Jeremiah wrote about this. He said, "Woe to him who builds his house on wrongdoing, his roof chambers on injustice, who works his neighbors without pay and gives them no wages." You can think of the day laborers today that are treated that way. And then we move on to Micah. This will be the last prophet that we'll look at for this contexting. Micah paraphrases some words from Isaiah, and he echoed that vision. They shall beat their swords into plowshares. One nation shall not raise the sword against another, nor shall they train for war again. And think about those words in relation to our reality today. So we have the prophets speaking in the Hebrew scriptures. Then we come to the time of Jesus, the incarnation. And Jesus is very much in line with that same prophetic tradition. It seems like I like to think of Jesus as coming to us as the justice of God. And then what he did, he sent his apostles out to announce that liberating and saving message. He wanted them to heal the hurting and then to confront those persons who were doing the hurting. And you recognize this section from Luke 4. It's like Jesus's mission statement. This is what he was about. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me and all of us to bring glad tidings to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free. And then we have that wonderful gospel from Matthew 26 and that wonderful speaking. And it says, the Son of Man assembling before him the nations. Now, he didn't say a person here and a person here. He said nations. So that tells us something about how we are together in this. And then he separated them, one as the shepherd separates sheep from goats. You know, he said, I was hungry, thirsty, a stranger, naked, sick, in prison. For some of you, you fed me, you gave me a drink, you welcomed me, you clothed me, you visited me, and you gave me a compassion. And to some others, he said, I was hungry. You never fed me. You never gave me a drink. You never welcomed me. You never clothed me. You never ministered to me. You never visited me. And then, of course, you know the next line. When did we see you? When? How did I miss that? And he said, when you fed others and clothed them and gave them a drink, you did it to me. And when you neglected to do all of those things, you neglected me. So that's when we saw you. So then, as we move into the period of the early church, you know, with the early church had the gift of the Spirit. Remember, this would be after Pentecost. And the early church tried to continue this message of Jesus. And because of persecutions, they spread into the Greco-Roman world. And as they did that, they wrestled with many issues, very similar to the ones that we confront in our world today. And these are the three that I lift up. They struggled with wealth, as we do today. They struggled with war, how to be in a war, and they struggled with the use of worldly power. And those three things, those three areas are very, very pertinent issues for our living in the world today. So just keep them in mind as we go through this brush of history. I remember the words of St. Augustine. Now, he lived into the 4th and 5th century. And he said, the superfluities of the rich are the necessities of the poor. When you possess superfluity, you possess what belongs to others. God gives the world to the poor as well as the rich. You know, there's our Vatican II documents. There's one on Gaudium et Spes, which is the pastoral constitution of the church in the modern world. And there's a line in it, it notes that the goods of creation are destined for humankind as a whole, not just for a few, not just for those who can afford them, not just for those who can take them by force, or not just those who can cheat someone else out of them. They are for all. Now that was a period of the early church, and if we keep continuing through history, we come to the medieval time, medieval church. This period of history is roughly between, it's the end of the Roman authority in the West, that's about the 5th century, and it goes to the time of exploration and Reformation, which is about the 15th. So you're talking of a period of about, from the 5th century to the 15th century, 10 centuries. And during this time, the church emerged with a very hierarchical vision of society. The church was the single most dominant institution in medieval life, and in Europe this is. Its influence really pervaded almost every aspect of people's lives. And being this powerful force, the church and the state were pretty closely linked. The church reinforced political authority, and the authority of the state also reinforced the authority of the church. But I also want to point out during this period of time, this 1,000 years, it was in 1054 that we had the Great Schism. That is when the church in Western Europe separated from the Orthodox Church in the East. And it's known as either the East-West Schism or the Great Schism. Very significant in our church history and in looking at all of this. So then we'll move on to, time of exploration. This started in the 1400s on, we know because of our, that line in 1492, Columbus, we all learned that in school. But we think about, and I want to put them in quotes, the discovery of the New World, because there were people here before Europeans came. But with that activity, there's another series of questions that confronted moralists. Are native peoples human? Do they deserve dignity and justice and equity? So in this part of history, I want to bring in our Dominican brother, Las Casas, Bartolomé de Las Casas. Excuse me, he was born in the latter half of the 1400s, so this is time of exploration. Now, when the explorers went out, the church, in the person of its priest, accompanied those explorers. And Las Casas was a priest. He was one of those who accompanied explorers to Hispaniola, which we know as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And like the explorers, he initially owned slaves. Now the Dominicans came to that island and from Spain, and they were appalled by the treatment of the Indians. And it was almost a year after they arrived, they watched to see what was happening. And then it was in Advent, this time of the church's year, in 1511, that they as a community talked about what they needed to say, and then they chose their best preacher. It was Antonio Montesinos. And he gave this preaching, part of which says, "By what right or justice do you keep the Indians in such horrible servitude? Are they not human? Have they not rational souls? Are you not bound to love them as yourselves?" Remember our scripture, to love one another as we love ourselves. We have Montesinos's words because Las Casas heard that sermon, and he took it to heart. He joined the Dominicans. He, of course, gave up his slaves, and he argued for their humanity. And he often wrote back to the brothers in Spain who were at a university in Salamanca, so that they used La Casa's experience in the New World to inform how they wrote about the dignity of people and they should be treated. And that's a significant piece for us. Now, it was during this time that 2 papal bulls were issued. A papal bull is like an apostolic letter, and the bull is that picture of the leaden seal. It was called a bulla, and so they're referred to as papal bulls. The first I want to refer to is Dum Diversis in 1452. That was issued by Pope Nicholas V, and it was issued for the Portuguese because they were the explorers. And he called upon the King of Portugal to listen to these words: invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans and other enemies of Christ. He also directed that the land and possessions of these people be taken away and that non-Christians be reduced to perpetual slavery. Those are hard words for us to hear, very hard words. It reminds me during the time in Iraq when ISIS was in force, their words to the Christians in Iraq was very similar. And then in 1493, there was one issued by Pope Alexander VI, and I think this one was to the Spanish. He said that the Pope's desire that the barbarous nations be overthrown and the nations, quote, discovered, be subjugated and reduced to the Catholic faith to propagate the Christian religion. Now, we know evangelization is important, but this is not evangelization that we're talking about. So these were very difficult words to hear. The impact of these became known as the doctrine of discovery, which you see on the screen. I want to point out, calling it a doctrine does not mean that it's a doctrine of the church. For us in the United States and studying US history, we have words referred to. We had the Monroe Doctrine, right? We had the doctrine of manifest destiny that you studied in history in school. And that manifest destiny, listen to this. It said that the expansion of the US throughout the American continents was both justified and inevitable. Does that sound a little bit like what we heard in the papal bulls? So the doctrine of discovery it's no longer a law, and even Pope Francis last March, put it out again and retracted it. But it still has an impact. It's still, if manifest destiny was based on it, they've become these words have become the foundation for legal decisions regarding land taken from American Indians. And you know some of that story. American Indians basically were not allowed to own land. They could only occupy it. And yet they were the ones here before. And it was as recently as 2005, I think that's not too long ago, a US Supreme Court justice cited the doctrine of discovery in a land claim against the Oneidas in New York. So the impact of words matters, and the impact of ideas that get carried on. So now we come to the time of the Reformation. And during this time, this would have been the 16th century, there were different tensions that were brought on by this period. And I want to point out, as I understand it and have read, Reformation is an all-embracing term which describes really the fragmentation of Western Christianity in that century. It's often attributed to Martin Luther, but it was an extremely complex process. You had religious, intellectual, political, and social forces that converged. It wasn't just one person saying, we need to do this. They included, we had a corrupt papacy at the time. We had piety that was not rooted in good theology. We had the after effects of the Western schism. And even though you say, well, that was 500 or 600 years ago, you know how long effects take in society. We had the rise of the nation state, because before that it was like empires. And so what does this nation state mean for all of us? And then we also had at that time Western Christianity being identified with Western civilization. And that is still thought of in the world today. When I alluded to Iraq before, Christian to many people in the East means Western world. And so that whole piece is a part of it. And of course, in any of these times, you have the vision and personalities of some individuals who spoke up a lot about things. And then I'm going to move into the 18th century. And we think of individual rights. This is often called the Age of Reason, or sometimes the Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinkers, especially in Britain and France, and really throughout Europe, they questioned traditional authority and embraced the notion that humanity could be improved by rational change. And so these were the key words of the time: reason, natural law, and progress. And I want to point out too, and I think it's important, they did see the church as something that really enslaved the human mind, didn't allow people to think for themselves. However, most Enlightenment thinkers did not renounce religion altogether. They opted rather for a form of deism. They accepted the existence of God and a hereafter, but they rejected the intricacies of Christian theology. And I think we need to be more realistic about the founders of our country. Many of the founders of our country were deist. They were not necessarily Christian. Now, what the Enlightenment did, you had wonderful books, essays, inventions. All of our scientific discovery came during this time and through this time. Well, as well as wars and revolutions. You know, the American and French revolutions were inspired by all the Enlightenment ideals. And not saying that's good or bad, it just is, in trying to understand what all of this is. Now, if you think about this brushstroke of history, we come to the late 1800s, and we come to the time of Pope Leo XIII. And at this time, I mentioned the scientific advancements. We had the Industrial Revolution, which you know about. Pope Leo tried to bring Catholic attitudes into the modern world without losing the core of our Catholicity. He often insisted there's no conflict between science and faith. And that's been tension in our church for a long time. His encyclical Rerum Novarum is considered the beginning of modern Catholic social teaching. So that's why he is significant in our work today. He was responding to the plight of poor workers. This is the beginning of industrial capitalism, and there were no protections for laborers. And you probably have read stories about the laborers during this time. So as we look at more about this, the foundation, there's a conviction underlying Catholic social teaching that God is at work in our history. God is at work in what's happening in our world and every day. And for us to perceive the God's action and for God's invitation to us, we talk about reading the signs of the time. What's happening out there that I need to be aware of and maybe need to respond to. The signs of the times comes from Matthew 16, where he's talking to the Sadducees and Pharisees. And he said, they put him to the test and show him a sign. And he said, you know how to read the face of the sky, but you cannot read the signs of the times. And so that's what we're called to do. John the 23rd used it in his encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace in the World. I mentioned Gaudium et Spes before, and it embraced the notion of reading the signs of the times and really brought it to the heart of the church's mission, that we cannot be blind to what is happening in our world. So this movement of the Spirit in human history is a call from us, or is a call to us, really. How do we listen to the Spirit speaking to us through all that is happening in our world today? So that just gives you that very brief introduction. But what I want you to take from this is Catholic social teaching is very much embedded in Scripture. It pays attention to what is happening in our world, and then we try to say, okay, then what am I called to do about it? So I'd like to give you a chance to talk to each other. Just from this brief sharing, like what touched you, what surprised you, or what questions might it have brought up for you? Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes to do this, and then I'll invite a few people to share. You don't have to, but you're welcome to, any insights just from your conversation. Okay, go ahead.
The man in the that material thing. That's really interesting because it gives us more definition in this too. I really need to think about it because I think
It's not really simple. The things that stay long. It's just listen, how many people have been put down through the history which is not stood up for needs of other
it's different. We
And Joe came up to you. And then the things that I heard Carol saying about, it's still done. And it isolates me from, yeah. It's isolated me from Carol. But then I'm always it's not right way. This isn't the right.
As opposed to, anyway, we'll see.
There was a lot written about this trip.
Different stories. He's going out on this.
There was a lot written about the types of
People don't.
also taking.
They won't.
Storytelling. Some people are good at it.
Yes.
Well, see, I would be a meeting now. They're just now. Yes, I'm only getting one. Where she only stays, so. And you were far more knowledgeable. I'm not going to.
Okay, if you can kind of finish your comment. I don't know, Sister Joan has a microphone. If there's, I don't know, is there anybody who wants to share any comment or insight from your conversation? Anybody want to say anything? You're welcome to. Okay, it sounds like there's one back there, okay.
I am. Oh, yeah, it's got good sound too. The thing that really surprised me was, I don't think I ever heard about the doctrine of destiny. Discovery.
Yeah. Mhm.
That shocked me because to hear those words, to be, I mean, I've heard the ideas, but to know that it was actually written down and this is what we believe, that's scary.
Mhm.
We've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Doris has a comment over here.
With that being said, at our table, we talked about, well, Mother Teresa saying that we all needed to start in our own little area, in our family, in our town, in our state. And I think sometimes we get depressed about all that we hear on the news instead of looking at what is being positively done in many places.
And we have to keep being light bearers of hope. That's, I think that's a big part of our calling, is to be hope in this world. Mhm. Anyone else? Okay, Cynthia?
Yeah, it brought to mind, like you said, hope. Also, our children who need good examples of empathy and compassion. I think if we can help our children see that we're all human beings and show them that example and bring them into other cultures and other people who are different from us, that they're people and we can love them. And we can learn a lot from each other.
Okay, well, you'll have another chance later on to share and to respond. We'll continue. Beth, you got to click the screen. There. We have to be coordinated here. Okay, now, you have a sheet like this. What I do on this, on one side are major Vatican documents, and on the other side are US bishops, major statements. So these documents have been a ways of paying attention to the signs of the times. I will be the first to admit that many of them are not easy reading. I always think that they can be ones that can put you to sleep. But in our time, we are blessed with Pope Francis because his documents are very readable. And maybe it's the translation, I don't know. You'll notice on the Vatican side that there's the most recent document of Pope Francis, Laudate Deum, which is a follow-up to the Laudato Si. And for any of these, you can actually Google them and find them on the Vatican website, just the document itself. On the other side, for the US bishops, it may sound like it's 2018 is a number of years ago, but they did one on Open Wide Our Hearts. It's the pastoral letter against racism, which is one of their recent ones that's important to lift up. So that sheet is just for your own reference to know the kinds of things that have been written about over the centuries from our bishops and from the Pope itself. Now, you have a second handout that looks like this, and it's the key principles of Catholic social teaching. So, I did the context and history. We have just briefly talked about some of the major documents, and this is the key principles. From those encyclicals and writings, bishops have done this. There have been theologians, other Catholic social justice writers. What they've done is they pulled out from the documents principles, because these are things that occur in a lot of the documents. And it's like they undergird all that's being said. And the point is, too, of this, that it continues to happen because, excuse me, Catholic social teaching is not set in stone. It's evolving because life is evolving among us. What informs Catholic social teaching in 2023 differs from what informed it at the time of Pope Leo in 1893. Yet, importantly, they're both grounded. They ground their message in that same faith in Jesus Christ, and that's what we have to hold on to. All right, so we're going to briefly, I'll scan through the principles because we don't have a lot of time to spend on each one, but you have this paper to go back to. And so the first one is the principle of the dignity of the human person. We learned that we are made in the image and likeness of God, but that means all of us, not just some of us, not just the people on our side, not just the people in the United States, but all people in the world are made in God's image. And so there's a uniqueness and a sacredness about it. And the point is, we don't earn this. Because we exist, we are loved by God and we are made in God's image. In the Eastern tradition, they have a greeting called Namaste when they greet one another. And Namaste really said, the God in me greets the God in you. I've read things so much that, you get a common response in our world is that some people count more than others. And you can look at different things that are happening in the world. And as you read about them, you get that sense. Some people do count more than others in terms of who gets water, who gets food, who gets the possibility to live safely. It's really difficult. And then we move into the care for creation. God created everything. If we love God, then we will care for what God has created. That's not only us, but that's the trees out there, all the covering in the courtyard. God created all of that. And we're a part of this circle of God's friends that we are called to help care for all of that. Recently in Catholic social teaching, there's more written about care for a common home, care for creation, but it really is connected to our whole tradition, even though it's only been lifted up and more written about it in recent years. And you get emails from us. I'm sure you get the Laudato Si Action platform notes. All of that is our efforts to care for our common home at this time. That Laudato Si Action platform is really a wonderful thing. The Pope is calling on 7 groups of people, 7 years for 7 goals to help life to be sustainable here on earth. Right now in Dubai, which is the United Arab Emirates, there's a UN meeting called COP28. COP stands for Conference of Parties. These are all the governments that signed on to the original UN climate agreement in 1992. And they're trying to build on that agreement so that governments of the world, because it's going to take not only our individual action, which it has to, but it has to take united action on a governmental level to do something to mitigate the climate crisis that we have in our world. And then we come to the community and the common good. I always think about this when, it's, we know that my good depends on your good. That's what it really says. And it's kind of like it's the basis for doing what all the other principles or the statements called for. When I think about this one of our sisters, we were talking about this one time, and she said, we don't go to God alone. We go to God together. Remember Matthew 25? The Son of Man assembled the nations. He didn't assemble individual persons. He assembled the nations, the community. That's us. And so how do we build community and that common good? When we are making decisions, we want our leaders making decisions. We want them to be making them out of what is the common good here that is needed? Whether it's about climate, whether it's about immigration, whether it's about racism, whether it's about so many other things, childcare, whatever. What is the common good? When I think of the community piece, we are being called to be a synodal church. Synodal means we walk together, we listen to one another. That's what we do in community. That's what we're called to do in community. And if you have community and you have people involved, we all have rights, but we also have responsibilities. That's just a pretty obvious piece, and yet sometimes we don't see that. But we have civil, political, social, economic rights. There's sometimes there's a right, talked about the right to water, the right to potable water. And so anytime that you have rights, there's also going to be corresponding duties and responsibilities that go with that. It was in 1948, it was December 10th of 1948, that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was declared. It was a UN piece, and it grew out of World War II, because we have Nazism and fascism during the war. And so it tried to set out fundamental human rights to be universally protected. Now, do all governments acknowledge those rights all the time? Sometimes maybe ours doesn't either, but we have that aspiration. That's our goal, to be able to do that. And that was a significant step because it was a new idea for that governments are responsible for how they treat their people, and they're responsible to others for how they treat their people. And then number 5 on your sheet is the option for the poor. You hear a lot about this from Pope Francis. He wanted a church of the poor, for the poor. We know that God has a special concern for the poor. I knew one time, but I don't know anymore, how many times Jesus talks about the poor in the New Testament. There's a great deal of focus on that. And when we say a preferential option, it's not adversarial. It doesn't mean, well, there's a preferential option for the poor, so that leaves anybody out who's not poor. That isn't the idea. It's that the deprivation and powerlessness of the poor, it wounds the whole community. We are affected when the poor are neglected. It makes us less of who we are or who we should be. I always think about, of itself, wealth is not evil, because one time, this was back in the 90s, I think mid-90s it was, and I was talking to a high school group and talking about some of these things. And finally, one kid raised his hand and he said, well, sister, how much money, how wealthy can I be and it's okay with God? Well, that's not quite where it is, you know. It's not that wealth is evil, but what you have is wealth alongside poverty. That's what's abhorrent to God. You know, the story in the New Testament, and we have the story of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man wasn't in hell because he was rich. He was in hell because his riches blinded him to Lazarus at his door. So that's what riches can do, but they don't always. I've kept this comment from Greg Boyle. I don't know if any of you know, he's the Jesuit that works in the hood in Los Angeles. He's done wonderful work of getting young people out of gangs and helping them to have an employment and a livable life. But he says, we should stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, but not stand in judgment about how they carry it. And I think of how I read opinions and essays, just exactly that, judging poor people about how they live their life when the system is stacked against them. So that piece would be important. And then we come to just the whole dignity of work and economic justice. You know, work is, if you think of it, it's really participating in God's creation. Work allows us to create, to do things for others, for ourselves. Certainly it provides for our lives. And then if we believe in the goodness of work, then we have to think about, what are the rights of workers? What about their rights in order to have a voice in this whole labor piece? There's always the line that the economy must serve the people and not the other way around. And Pope Francis always says, economy serves people and planet, but not profit. Now, profits are a part of it, but if that's the ultimate goal and people and planet are shunned aside, then something is wrong. Something is wrong that we have to look at that. And the last one that you'll see there is solidarity and peace. I think of solidarity really touches back to community, because solidarity means my care for brothers and sisters in the world. So we've been doing, how, for Dominicans, these last few years, how are we in solidarity with our Ukrainian brothers and sisters? And then we get challenged, how are we in solidarity with our Russian brothers and sisters? We're struggling as a nation and as a people, and for us, as we look at Israel and the war and Hamas in the war and the Palestinian people. Now, none of these are easy things. They're all very complex. And when people try to simplify them, that's when people get hurt. We have to be willing to look at complexity and be able to hold those things. Our justice promoters in North America met a few weeks ago to talk about this and how are we peacemakers at this time. And someone started by saying, we have to be able to hold the pain of the Israeli people and hold the pain of the Palestinian people at the same time. And you probably have heard conversations where that's not allowed. You either take this side or that side. And so how are we in solidarity with people? Solidarity just builds on that community and what we're to be about. And then I think it does lead to our own peacemaking and how we are in the world. Last year at COP27, there was a breakthrough in the countries meeting together because they made some decision about what they called a loss and damage fund, because poor countries, developing countries, have contributed less to the climate crisis. It's the wealthy countries that have emitted all of the greenhouse gases, or most of them. And so how can wealthy countries assist poor countries at this time? And because of that, because everybody's going to suffer, we know what's happening in fires and weather-related pieces and malnutrition and those kinds of things. So when I think of solidarity and peacemaking, I also think of just the whole part of nonviolence, how to be nonviolent in our world. We settle many of our problems by violence, and probably I'm talking on the larger scale, but we do war. Look at the drones that are used in war now. They can be used peacefully. Bombing raids. And then we do assisted suicide, even our abortion, capital punishment, mass murders in our country. People get mad, you pick up a gun and shoot somebody. It's just, there's so many ways that we use violence and take life. Actually, it's not always physical actions too. There's a lot of the hateful language, bullying, whether it's in person or on social media. And I just did, there's something in Springfield at UIS. I always get SIU and UIS mixed up. At the university here, it's called the Sangamon Experience. And one of the new pieces coming out, there was a section of it they were talking about words matter. And so I was working with our Scion group, our immigrant advocacy group, on words about immigrants and how words matter with that. But look at the words we use. We had a war on poverty. We had a war on terror. And I've heard people use the term warriors for God. Now, I don't think God is looking for warriors. I think God is looking for people who love. And so even how the language that we use can make a difference. Now, before I open up to further conversation for you, let's see, is it time? We need a break, okay. I had one in here, I don't know where it went, but anyway, thank you. Okay, we'll take a break and then come back together. How long? What? 10 minutes? Okay. All righty. Thanks, Joan.
They're all lying. I was, I'm not trying to say this. But you think that I was I mean, because they know that's my space. Increasing the fee. And I feel like
And this is what this is about.
and I found a whole different for me. One that where some of them were. Friday. Everybody was. So we did it last year, 2016. As it is.
The reason why I went to get surgery is that I also decided to climb the stairs to the toilet. That's just called and asking to go back. I've been asking God, is he getting me good? I mean, but I do forget that made well. Because I plans and done the one that's I saw my surgeon and I felt that, you know, I just couldn't believe it. I is getting up and see something you don't know. Really, that's the hardest thing. And I've done all the exercises religiously. Because, you know, I need to have a chance.
I love your presentation here. I feel like I'm in this last
I don't want to walk over there. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I got up there. Put them in the blender. They look like it. I think it's just from the store. That's what's the I never heard of it too. Obviously, sister as much as she loves them. And I said, how about the second part of my purpose? Honestly, I think it's just it's like, hey, you just want to do
I'll give all my savings for this. I added a new, like, Sister Martin Lee said, I didn't know you can play with it. I said, I literally I left the paperwork out of cinnamon and black pepper somewhere, everything. Like when I was 6 one time, it was like, I can put them into the it's fresh pizza that is baked and they are just beautiful. There's no garbage, no salt in it, except the one that's in Pita, it's P-I-T-A. It's on Southwest, right? Like Southwest or like baby. It's sometimes like a circle race.
Yeah, I will. What was I thinking?
That's good. No, you didn't, and please don't worry.
It was in
Well, it says that there's, you have to be sure you're listening to news. For example, Fox News is pretty one-sided, for example. You never know and I think that's what she's saying, is be sure that you're widely.
I used to watch church.
I think we get 15 minutes.
Sometimes you don't some days
It's hard to find. Sure. That's 1967. 67, so what is that? This is 23. 56 years. Long time. We celebrate 25, 50, 60, and 75. I think they celebrate 65. We may not make it to 75. Very few make it to 75 years is the best. We have two sisters right now who are living to that time. We're supposed to celebrate 75 years. That's true. There's two of us. There's still two of them with us. We're living among so no, it's not as easy all the time. But you know, we learn how to work for each other. said it was good to send that. Notice will just increase strategy. That's why sometimes human connection. They need support. It's interesting. I worked with a very conservative years ago indicator on the great organization. One day you preach a little bit. I think the answer is I was taken aback by that. But I think there's some truth to that. To do it alone, it's impossible. And they hear so much. And if you listen to so much, if you carry so much, if there's nobody to share it with, that's exactly We're good.
Okay, if we could gather again, you can keep on eating and we'll continue. Okay, whoops. All right. Now, we'll have some more conversation at your tables, but I want to do some signs of the times on our current reality. So this is one of the first ones I use. This is not new. It's a number of years old, and every time I check it out, it still proves pretty true, so I still use it. This says, this is the distribution of income in the world, not wealth, but income, what people earn. And so what it's saying, the wealthiest people, the top 20%, earn almost 83% of the income. And of course, it's the champagne glass distribution, so it goes down. You've got the poorest 20% earning 1.4%. So that's a sign of our time. That's how reality is out there. And, excuse me. And so what it means is, of course, the folks at the bottom of the stem certainly aren't going to have what it takes to provide for themselves. So, a significant thing. All right, now, this time I want to do something, and we've got some chairs back there, and so we're going to do an activity because I want to talk about the distribution of wealth. Now, some people have done this before, they know, but I'd like associate candidates, and what I need is 10 volunteers. All you have to do is either sit on a chair or stand. You don't have to say anything. You won't be embarrassed. I won't embarrass anybody. Okay? Good. Thanks, Marianne. Good start.
She didn't tell us, so I got it, no, we gotta do it because of the.
Okay. Would you go back and sit on one of the chairs? There are 10 chairs, so I need 10 folks. Oh, good. Here comes. Oh, well, no, we got one more. Well, got 2 people going, so you 2 have to decide who goes. Oh, there's 2 places. Thank you. I couldn't see them. Oops, we got one more. We need one more down here. Okay, oops, good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, I use this activity that was designed by a group called United for a Fair Economy. And we're talking now in the United States, not income on labor, but accumulated assets or wealth, okay? So think of each chair as being 10% of the wealth. And each person is 10% of the population. Now we know that that's not how things look in our world, and they haven't looked that way. So I want to go back to about 1976. And at that time, 10% of the population owned 50% of the wealth. So Marianne, since I know your name, you are the fortunate person that you get to be the wealthy person today. Okay. Now, she's 10% of the population. I said that she owns 50% of the wealth. That means Marianne gets 5 chairs. So that's Doris and Sherry, and I don't know the next name, Laura and Judy. You have to get out of your chair and go. Why don't you just stand behind some of the others at the other end? Okay, so Marianne, she's the wealthiest 10%. You might move down to the 3rd chair. No, I guess the 2nd chair would be okay. All right. The reason I want her in the 2nd chair is, you know, during the Occupy movement, well, they talked about the 1%. You know, the wealthiest 1%. Well, at that time, the wealthiest 1% owned 2 chairs. So we think of her head as being the wealthiest 1%. Yeah. So the wealthiest 1% had 2 chairs. Okay. Now we're going to fast forward to the 2000s. It could be now, it could be 10 years ago. It doesn't matter much. And now we have to see what's going to happen in the 2000s. More people are going to have to move. At this point, the wealthiest 10% own 70% of the wealth. So that means Habiba and Carol. Okay, now Judy, you're going to have to move over. You guys have to scrunch behind the 3 chairs now because Marianne owns all 7. She owns all 7, and the elite, her head, you might say, has 4 of those. So you move down to the 4th chair to show us that, Marianne. Okay, so here we have the situation where the top 1% owns 40% of the wealth, and down at the other end, we have 70% of the people with how many chairs? 3. Now, somebody will say, well, it's not exactly that way, and I'm not pretending that it's exactly that percent. What I'm trying to show is the trend of what has happened and where wealth lies. And you can see the difficulty with that as we learn about things in our own country. Okay? Thank you very much. I'll give you a hand here. So we talk about option for the poor. think about those things. Now, the next thing I want to do, the next sign of the time, we talked about solidarity and peacemaking. So I want to look at military spending. And you might say, well, you're just choosing economic things. You know, economy matters, money matters. And it behooves us who are peacemakers and justice makers to know how it works and where it is. So when President Eisenhower left office, he gave his farewell address, and there's a quote from that address, which is really pretty good, the whole address is, but in that he said, beware of the military-industrial complex. In other words, the military with the business community. Of course, since that time, we have the pharmaceutical industrial complex, you might say. We have all kinds of the prison industrial complex, you know, business in prisons and so on. But that was his warning. So we know he wants security, but what is security and at what cost? In this picture I have here, the red, and from the back I realize this is hard to get the whole piece, but the red is just the United States. And this was 2020, no, it's expenditure database, April of 23. So our cost is $877 billion. That's what we're spending on military. The column over here of various colors is the next 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 countries in the amount of spending, and it doesn't equal what we spend. China spends whatever amount that is, maybe it's 200 billion. You got China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, UK, Germany, France, South Korea, Japan, and Ukraine. Those are the next 10 countries. If you combine all of their military spending, it does not equal what we in the United States spend on military. Now, we know from conversations we're going to balance our budget or we're going to have a shutdown and all those things. We know that what never gets cut is military spending. Education will get cut, welfare, assistance for poor people will get cut, education will get cut, healthcare assistance will get cut, but we do not cut military. And that's pretty much true around the world. When we talk about the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and they want countries to be responsible, they never have to cut military, but they have to cut the other kind of social spending. So I think about that in terms of that's the mentality that these decisions are made in. I always like Martin Luther King's quote. He said, "Wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows." Wars don't settle anything. And we say, well, we need all of this so that we'll be safe for defense. When I think of Ukraine, I want to support our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. It pains me to know all the military that we are sending to the Ukraine. And we even sent cluster bombs. Those should never, ever be used. So these are complex things to think about, and they're hard, but we have to know what it is. And the other thing I want to share with you is about water. I always choose water because I grew up on a farm, and my dad was always on us about how much water we used and being sure that we didn't waste any. But you can survive maybe a month without food, but only a week or less without water. You need that. Our bodies need water. So we just look at this, how precious water is for us. On the earth, 97% is salt, only 3% is fresh. Of the fresh, about 0.5% is available to us. Another way of thinking about it that a group wrote, they said, if our water supply were 26 gallons, then the usable one would be about half a teaspoon, you know, when you do a ratio thing like that. And I just saw this the other day, and I thought this was interesting to me. This is from Woods Hole Oceanographic Place, and that large, I enlarged the piece at the bottom. The large blue marble is all the water on, in, and above the earth. The next little marble is the liquid fresh water. And the teeny marble that you can hardly see is the freshwater lakes and rivers that we would have access to. So water is crucial. And if, as the climate crisis continues, if we are having difficulties with immigration now, we will have many more difficulties with immigration in the future as people strive to go to a place where they can survive. So my pitch with this always is, when we buy bottled water, we privatize it. We're privatizing water, which means if you've got money, you can have water. And if you don't have money, you don't have it. Bottled water is big business. I think Nestle is considered Nestle Waters is the largest bottled water company in the world. They sold their North American brands, but they sold them to private equity firms, which scares me because that means there's no control over those firms and what might happen. I saw the other day this sign that said, bottled water companies don't produce water, they produce plastic bottles. And you know, people pay more. Your tap water is much cheaper. Bottled water is anywhere up to 500 to 1,000 times more expensive than your tap water is. And I read someplace where 64% of bottled water is actually just tap water. So, you know, be conscious of that. And this is a sign of our time, because this has grown in the last 10, 15 years, hugely. And the other one I want to lift up is human trafficking, because of our connection to a group. It's considered modern day slavery. And you know about human trafficking and have read about it too. You know, what I've learned, I was at a conference this fall, and I'm learning that in the United States, it isn't always that people are taken from one place to another. They're considering human trafficking when young people, you know, a lot of it happens on their phone, and they connect with somebody who's not who they say they are. And they are asked to send a picture of themselves, a compromising picture of themselves. And then once they do that, they are threatened with, I need another picture, or I will show this to your parents. I will distribute it to all your classmates. I will show it to your whole school. And so the young person is caught in that. And they might be living in their own home, and they are considered trafficked because of that. 2 years ago, when I went to the conference, there was a speaker from Missouri, and he did talks in schools. But before he went in, he would always do a survey. And his survey, now I don't know if this is true across the board, but this was in Missouri, a lot of rural places even. He said that between 9 and 12 years old, 50% of the young people had sent a compromising picture of themselves. That just blew my mind. So trafficking is a difficult thing, it's a hard thing, and especially with our social media pieces right now. So I just want to tell you about this Alliance to End Human Trafficking. It's recently renamed. It used to be called U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking, but it's founded and supported by Catholic sisters in the United States. And there's a newsletter published called Stop Trafficking. It's a wonderful resource. It's very intelligent and on-target resource, Plus, they index their articles. So if you want to know about trafficking in the fishing industry, you can look that up and it'll tell you which one in on the archives to go to. It's a very wonderful service. But I'm really proud of the Catholic Sisters, and they changed the name because other people are joining with us in an alliance to end human trafficking. Okay, so we've done the principles. I did a few signs, and now I'd like to give you a few minutes. We won't have as long to have some conversation at your table. So what are maybe some concerns that you have or that you see in our society? How do the principles speak to those? And then, maybe what actions you're called to. And if you don't know today, that's fine, but maybe just start the conversation. Okay, go ahead and I'll call you back together in a few minutes.
I don't know what the issue is. She stopped her eyes closed. So what do I do? It's probably happening. I just said. Yeah, but that's because special victims because special victims She forgot the story. What does someone have to do? Only listen. I have no idea. You don't have to do anything but listen. I came across so many people that dismissed me, didn't want to hear me. You don't look like you have any problems. Oh, it's not nice to wow, you're just a rich kid. No, I couldn't get her to listen.
We experience life so differently. That's really scary. I wasn't done.
And others.
I'm sorry to cut you off so quickly. Anyone have anything they would like to share? You can take a few minutes, but right here.
Having, being able to sit at the table with you has given me, I've gotten more insight, but this has been extremely informative. And I guess the next question would be how we can utilize and use some of the information that you've given us
Mhm.
in our lives as mothers and grandmothers and, executives and housewives and retirees and old people like me. You've given us a lot to think about. I mean, you've loaded a lot of things in here to think about. These are heavy, heavy things.
They are heavy, you're right.
But I guess I would ask, have you thought about what we can do to help further good in the world, to help further God's action in the world?
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. I think Jeannie has a
I
comment.
have a, what do you do?
You have to use, no, you have to use the microphone.
What do you do when you have people at your house? And I brought up human trafficking, and the response was, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know anything about it. I'm thinking, how can you not?
Yeah.
She just shut me down, and I just wanted to leave my own house.
If somebody is not ready to hear about something, you just stop. That's all you do. Yeah, you can't force, we always talk about having an attitude of curiosity, which helps us. If we're curious about something, then we will try to know. But if somebody doesn't have that, I don't know that you can force them to have it. And Sister Beth, I apologize to Robert online. She gave me this, and I forgot to say it earlier. From the first session, he did post something that she can't see them when we're sharing screen, but he said, it's amazing how we are still dealing with many of the same issues the early church did. We also thought that the Dominicans kind of calling out the behavior of the explorers was encouraging, inspiring. So you ask about what can you do? That's a big question. I've got 2 more slides that I'm going to finish with, and then I will talk more about that. Because, you can think about Catholic social teaching is to say that we have 2 books to live by. We have the book of life, which are some of the things I've been talking about, but we also have the book of God's word, which is, those principles are based on God's word to us. So it's, I think, our responsibility that when we see things happening in the world, how we view them matters based on what scripture teaching is. And I say scripture teaching, I don't mean you go to the Bible and pick out 5 words that matches. That does not work. That does not work. It is the story. It is what Jesus was teaching us, what God was teaching us. And it's bigger than just a few words, because people proof text every once in a while. Well, it says this here, so this must be right. It doesn't work that way. I think all of you have a life orientation that you would want to say no to injustices that harm others and creation. And really to do that, we need the support of others. We talked at our table here about what community does for you. You can't do all of this alone. And if you do it alone, you can get very discouraged. You can get very discouraged. So I'll share some things about what we do. One of our things is we sometimes take a corporate stance. And it's a position that we agree upon. And what it does, it authorizes leadership to speak in our name about when something comes up. So our last corporate stance was on migration and support of migrants and immigration reform in some way. In terms of like what you can do is sometimes we send out a message and ask you to think about this or to call somebody. Right now, you can be praying for COP28. Pray that leaders make a difference. Even another piece of this that I always tell folks, for you to be aware of what's going on. Your awareness creates energy in the world that makes a difference. When we went to Iraq in 2015, for the sisters there, it was that they were not forgotten. So when you are aware of something, even those people don't know it, they are not forgotten. So you can be aware of the Rohingya in China. You can be aware of the Sudanese in Sudan that are just under horrible conditions right now. You can be aware of the Yemenis in this proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. You know, to be aware of peoples and what's happening in their lives is a wonderful gift to others. Because when things are forgotten about and they're off the table, nobody's going to do anything. So awareness always counts. We promoters, every couple of years, we publish a call to justice. You know, this is with other Dominicans in the North America. And so we have 5 areas. And this, you know, I can, Sister Joan can send it out to you. I can, you're receiving a lot of our emails. You receive the LSAP notes. Those are things you can do. You receive the Justice and Truth Meet from the Justice Committee. And we often have things in there that you could either read or be aware of. One of the pieces that we've been working and trying to educate ourselves about is the LGBTQ concern. And we're publishing stories of transgender families that they shared with the committee of the U.S. Catholic bishops. And whether the bishops heard them, I don't know, but they shared it with them. So just even those kinds of things helps it to move along. It makes a difference. You know, and you can talk to others, but if they're not ready to hear, then you do back off. You don't. And maybe for some folks, they can't, in their minds and in their hearts, they can't carry anything else right now. And we have to respect that for them. So I hope those things are, oh, there's one more thing. And you should have just received this Friday, our Month for Peace. Dominicans do this together. We've been doing it for 7 or 8 years now. And this year, our Dominican family in Latin America has put this together. They really have given us very good resources. And I've shared some with you, and I'll continue to share them every Friday in preparation. So those are things you can do. Small things, but they count. I was telling somebody, our Justice Committee read a book called Resisting Structural Evil. You know, systems. You know, we have the system of racism or poverty or whatever. And this author said, and she's a theologian, a Presbyterian theologian, I think, and she said, systemic evil cannot be dismantled by an individual, but it will never be dismantled until individuals act. And I think, I remember that all the time. Every action matters, no matter what you're doing. So I hope that's helpful enough, and I thank you for your attention. I see I'm a couple minutes over, so I don't know if you have more comments, Sister Joan, or whatever. But thank you, thank you, thank you.
Aren't we blessed to have Sister Marcelline today and as our justice promoter? Thank you, Sister, for sharing your wealth of experience and knowledge. So watch for Sister's emails that continue to come. You just received the one she spoke about on Friday to help you during this season of Advent. And if you don't have email, someone, your sponsor, can share it with you. Once again, we thank all of those who make this day possible, those who brought our snacks today, our Laura Knight and Reha Habibi today, so thank you. Next time it will be Carol West and Jess Walcher. And thank you to our technology people, Sister Beth and Brandon, and also Sister Martha Marie, who sets everything up for us each time. Our next meeting is Sunday, January the 7th, and there will be 2 presentations that day. Sister Beth is going to speak to us on mission and ministry, followed by a presentation by Associate Bob Blackwell and Sister Kathleen Ann Tate on our anti-racism efforts as a community. So special prayers for you and your families during this Advent and Christmas season, and know that all of our sisters remember you in prayer. I did have a question today from Sherry about the use of our library. If any of you are wanting library materials, I will let the switchboard know that it's open to you as candidates also, and you could come and check out materials to use from our library. So please know that that's one of the benefits. So again, may you recognize Jesus in all that you meet during this season of Advent and Christmas, and a blessed Christmas to you and all of those that you love. Thank you.